I'm speaking with Anita De Bellis from the College of Nursing and Health Sciences at Flinders University about your paper, Anita, Grey Nomads with Diabetes Self-Management on the Road, a scoping review. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Melissa.
I wonder if we could first talk about your research team. Who were they?
Oh, okay. Look, I got together a team based on expertise. So myself, I have research interest in aged care. Another colleague, Pauline Hill, is a diabetes educator, as is Jane Giles. She's a diabetes educator. She also works for South SA Health, rural and remote, as an advanced practitioner. And then two colleagues who are also grey nomads, Wendy Abigail and Chris McLeod. And we sought a pharmacist because of some previous research. So Mark Apolloni came on board, who's a pharmacist in South Australia and also president of the South Australian chapter of the Pharmacy Guild. And that's about it, I think. Quite a number. Oh, yes, and Liam McClory, who's a medical student who helped us with the review because he has an interest in endocrinology and he wanted to get involved in some research. So he came on board for the review as well.
Fantastic. Actually, before I ask you the next question, maybe we should first define grey nomad.
Yes, well, it's anyone over 65 who has a recreational vehicle that they travel with and in and live in for long periods of time in Australia. So there are other names that have been applied as well, but grey nomad seems to have stick. So it's those retirees and the baby boomers that have taken to the road to travel around Australia, sort of wanting a freer lifestyle, wanting to see Australia.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Terrific. So how did your scoping review come about?
Okay, well, first of all, we got some funding from the Australian Diabetes Research Fund from Australian Diabetes Educators Association to do some research, and so we used some of that money to fund this scoping review. And it came about because previous research that we had done with diabetes educators in rural and remote South Australia identified some needs for grey nomads with diabetes. So this scoping study sort of resulted from that, and we're also doing some research that I'll probably talk about later with you.
Terrific. And what were the main findings of your review?
Well, we sort of found out the grey nomads with diabetes, there's not much in the literature, although we have done one study with diabetes educators about grey nomads with diabetes. But we found out, it's about 2% of the population that are grey nomads. They're mainly retirees and they mainly take to the road for that sort of freer lifestyle to see Australia. So that's one of the findings. Another finding was we found out about their health. So many had chronic comorbidities, chronic conditions. Some had diabetes in the scoping review. They had a high level of alcohol, a high-ish level of alcohol intake. They were often had obesity, and they also didn't score well on quality of life indicator scores, so that was interesting.
Yeah.
And we found out that approximately 8% returned early or earlier than expected because of a health problem.
Right, 8%.
Yeah. Other things, they were poorly prepared to self-manage their chronic conditions. A lot of them didn't realise that the services in rural and remote Australia weren't at their fingertips when they needed it. And so there were problems with accessing health service. services. We sort of defined the elements of self-management from the literature we reviewed, things like problem solving, decision making, those sorts of elements around self-management, and that they really had to be quite self-sufficient because accessing GPs, diabetes educators, other allied health was not always possible. Long waiting lists. I mean, we all know that rural and remote health is under-resourced. They have problems with staffing, so this sort of reinforced all that. So there were some barriers to self-managing their diabetes or even getting appropriate management. Healthcare services often stretched and not able to fit them in unless it was an emergency and they had to go to an emergency department. There were problems with accessing services. So that sort of laid the groundwork for what we're doing now.
Yes. Oh, so what are you doing now? What needs to happen next?
Okay, so we've done the scoping review, which gives us the background, and we've also completed a survey of grey nomads themselves. So we put up a survey, an internet survey, and of course this all happened around COVID, so a lot of grey nomads were stopped in their tracks in 2020.
Yes.
And there were border restrictions and things like that, but we still managed to get this survey out and we had quite a good response rate. So we're in the middle of analysing that data. And the other thing we did was with the diabetes educators, we found that grey nomads often went to pharmacies because they were accessible in rural and remote areas.
Right.
When they had a problem with their diabetes, if they had a problem with equipment, if they ran out of supplies, sometimes when they had an adverse event such as hypoglycemia, but we found that they did access pharmacies. So what we've done and just completed is we've interviewed rural and remote pharmacists to get their perspective and their experiences of grey nomads with diabetes specifically. So and we're in the middle of analysing that. So we're sort of continuing on, and we hope from all of that we get some sort of checklist for people who are travelling with diabetes to better prepare them for what they might meet on the road, and also an education module on diabetes for pharmacists or allied health, in that they don't need education on medications, but they probably need a bit of education on self-management and how to support someone in their self-management. So, we're looking at that as well. And hopefully more funding, we'll get some more funding to actually implement those two products and evaluate them and see how they're going.
Great. They sound really, really helpful. Thank you. For sure. Thank you so much for speaking with me today. I really look forward to hearing the outcomes of your next research.
All right. Thanks, Melissa.
Thanks, Anita.